Good day, C3RF members from across the nation and beyond. Welcome to another session of In Hot. Today's In Hot interview features yet another David and Goliath encounter as we discuss basically what has to be described as medical tyranny in Canada. We have an able wingman with us on this endeavor, and it's Dr. Charles Hoffe. Dr. Charles Hoffe is a family physician from Lytton, British Columbia. He is a South African medical graduate who moved to Canada in 1990. He's been a family physician and emergency room physician to the community of Lytton, BC for 30 years now. After seeing serious harm in his own patients from the experimental COVID vaccines, he has been an outspoken advocate for patient safety, medical ethics, and the Hippocratic Oath, which of course is first, do no harm. Dr. Hoffe has therefore been threatened and punished by the British Columbia medical authorities, who claim that he has put people at risk by causing vaccine hesitancy. He is therefore no longer permitted to work as an emergency room physician, and he is under investigation and awaiting trial by the College of Physicians and Surgeons of British Columbia. He is accused of the crime of misinformation for contradicting the political narrative of safe and effective and advocating for early treatment of COVID-19 as an alternate to the vaccine. Dr. Hoffe, welcome aboard. It's a real pleasure to have you with us here. This is quite the story. Quite frankly, in Canada, one would have to think no more than a couple of years ago, this would be totally unbelievable. But here you find yourself, and I'm going to start off by saying I first noticed this your situation way back in April of 2021 when something caught my attention. And I'm going to share a screen here, and I'm going to throw up an open letter that you wrote to Dr. Bonnie Henry, and this is way back in 5 April 2021. Can you see that letter, sir?
Yes, I can.
Okay, in the letter, basically, I want to go down to this highlighted portion here. You talk about you're very, very concerned about your community, about the dispensation of the vaccine because you've got a whole bunch of adverse effects. And I highlighted a paragraph here. It says, so in short, our small community of Lytton, BC, we have one person dead, 3 people who look as though they will be permanently disabled following their first dose of Moderna vaccine. The age of those affected ranges from 38 to 82 years of age. And I'll just stop share there. But that is very, very concerning. And I think what you're doing is you're highlighting safety signals here that are very, very serious. Could you tell me what happened to that letter as a result of you writing it?
Well, I had been warned by a medical colleague that if I just sent a letter to Dr. Bonnie Henry, I was warned she doesn't reply to letters. And especially if the letter doesn't follow the political agenda, they will just ignore it. And so I was warned that unless I made it an open letter, it was going nowhere. It would go probably straight into the shredder or hit the delete button. But okay. I sent it by registered mail. So of course I didn't get a response from Dr. Bonnie Henry, but she did respond indirectly by referring me to the province's top vaccine safety specialist. So I had a meeting with this safety specialist in which I told her about all of the neurological problems that had arisen in my patients since their Moderna shot. And her response, without having assessed any of my patients in any way, she just literally just right off the cuff said, those are not vaccine injuries, those are all coincidences.
Wow.
And I said to her, but in every single case, and I think that by the time I spoke to her, I think I had 9, people with neurological injuries. At the time of that letter, it was 3 that were permanently disabled. It would very soon became 6. It's now, I think, 12. Anyway, they were determined that this was safe. They were not even willing to contemplate that it may not be safe. They did not want to investigate. They didn't want to even acknowledge it. They said, nope, these are coincidences. We're not willing to do anything, about this. They just shrugged it off which is medically irresponsible The
Yes.
doctors are supposed to do no harm. And
Yes.
so I was trying to point out a serious safety signal that I was personally seeing, and they were shrugging it off and saying, nope, it's safe and effective.
Well, that is just absolutely incredible. You would think that observations like that from a frontline doctor, a practitioner in the field would merit some sort of positive feedback, some sort of investigation. This is, from what I can see from my end, I'm just a layman when it comes to medical things and systems. Is it would appear to me that you're doing your job. You're highlighting, you're forwarding some very, very serious concerns.
And, I mean, patient safety should be any doctor's highest priority.
Yes.
And it was certainly mine. Yet I was told I was putting people at risk by making these issues known. And so 1 month after that letter was sent to Dr. Bonnie Henry, the BC College of Physicians and Surgeons, and it was echoed by, I think, every college across Canada, sent out a statement warning doctors that if they contradicted the political narrative, which was essentially safe and effective, get your shots. If anyone contradicted it, you would be put under investigation, and if necessary, disciplined. And so this was the response of Dr. Bonnie Henry's safety expert was denial. Yeah. And the response from the college was threats of punishment for doing this sort of thing.
Well, I found out now you wrote your letter in April of 2021. I also note from my casting back in the historical record here that in about the same time, April, May of 2021, Public Health Canada came out with data and a report. Didn't receive very much attention from the mainstream media, but that report basically said that the vast majority of people who were dying from COVID were people who were in long-term care institutions, government institutions. Yes. And that basically, I think the number was over 85% of the people who were dying were older with comorbidities in government institutions. And basically, the working population, there was very little threat at all. There was no real need to keep these people from going to work or doing or living their lives as per normal. Now,
yes, prior to the vaccine rollout, the average age of those in Canada who died with COVID was 83. I think it's now 82. So in other words, it shows you who was vulnerable to COVID. It was people who were already beyond normal life expectancy. So the fact that they were injecting children and that they shut down schools and made them wear masks and all these incredibly harmful things was absolutely senseless, because they were not the people who were vulnerable. And they were not the people who were spreading it either. I mean, it wasn't a big issue for the majority of people, because it was well known that even 1 year into the pandemic, 90% of the population of Canada had some degree of natural immunity.
Yes. Well, this is a very, very serious turn of events here, because we're talking about the federal government spending in excess of $300 billion, going into debt by an extra $300 billion because of the response to the pandemic. For myself, I got feedback. I've interviewed a few doctors on this, particularly from Ontario, and you're right. They talk about the fact that their college of physicians and surgeons in Ontario came out with a statement that said, you better watch what you say, because you can't go against this narrative here. And I was one doctor who she told me that you're kind of her hero, because you really your letter really opened her eyes and started her thinking about what she was going to do. Her name was Mary O'Connor, and I've had some talks with her over the recent past, and she relates the story that the College of Physicians and Surgeons actually raided her offices and took files. They took patient files because they believed that she was authorizing exemptions on a too laissez-faire basis. So did you find anything like that where your files were kind of accessed?
Well, my files. So my files all went up in smoke. My office got burnt. Sadly, I lost all of my patient records, all of my equipment, everything. And my files were all on paper. I hadn't gone to electronic records, so I didn't have them backed up anywhere. And
Okay.
so tragically, about 3 months after I sent that letter, my whole practice went up in smoke. And so my file had to start from scratch with new files, but they're pretty thin now.
Well, I guess that's one way of foiling the bureaucrats. I guess if you can't get to it,
I think so.
on your records.
you know, it's interesting. I after that, it was difficult, you know, because people who had very complex medical histories would come and they would expect me to remember it all. And so, you know, some of it I could, but not, you know, a lot of patience. Anyway, but it was interesting that some had literally come to me and said that they were so glad that their medical file had gone up in smoke because they had things in their past that they wanted to leave in the past, you know, and they were sort of glad there's no record of it, you know, things that they'd spoken to me about that were deeply personal. And I was a meticulous note keeper because I felt like you couldn't take good care of people unless you could refresh your memory of what the issues were. And you know, with thousands of patients, you can't do that, just remember for everybody. So you've got to take notes. And but anyway, it was interesting that
so I see a couple of things going on here, Doctor. I see doctor-patient confidentiality is being attacked. It's being abrogated. I also see informed consent going the way of the buffalo here, because what happened was you're writing your concerns to the medical bureaucracy in British Columbia, and your concerns should be, I think, part of that whole idea of public education, and people should know if there's a problem in Lytton, then maybe there's a problem in Vancouver, maybe there's a problem in Toronto, and this all adds up to informed consent. So what we have here is what just my opinion, but it looks to me like it's lawlessness. How can things like this, doctor-patient confidentiality, informed consent go by the wayside?
Well, it's tragic because those are foundational principles of medicine. That therapeutic relationship that exists between a patient and a doctor, that is supposed to be sort of sacrosanct. You know, it's guarded by privacy. And you know, with Bill 36 now in Canada, which gives the college literally the freedom to come and seize all the patient files from a doctor at any time, means that those patient files are no longer confidential. The government can seize them at any time. So this is definitely a violation of people's rights to confidentiality and a violation of the therapeutic relationship between doctors and their patients.
I think if colleges of physicians and surgeons come out with these kind of rules, I guess the best they could do is call them guidelines. I don't think they have the authority to tell the doctor what he is supposed to tell his patient. Yeah. So if they come up with these rules, but it seems like they're treating these rules like laws, because you are being punished. Tell us about how you've been punished as a result of throwing up these safety signals.
Yeah, well, even before I sent that letter to Dr. Bonnie Henry, informing her of what her shots were doing to my patients, because I thought she needed to know, and the public needed to know, because the media was certainly not going to tell them. Before that, I had received a gag order. I'd sent an email to a group of colleagues in the area where I work, and two rural communities side by side, Lytton and Lillooet in southern BC. And I'd sent an email to a group of medical colleagues who were actually giving these shots. I was not giving these shots to anybody because I was pretty sure right off the bat, well, I knew there was no safety information on them. They were brand new technology that had not been adequately researched.
Yes.
So there's no way that anybody could say they were safe. I mean, that was a guess at best. And so I'd sent a letter, an email, just once there were some serious safety signals, I sent an email to a group of colleagues, and One of them sent that to the College of Physicians and Surgeons as a complaint that I was causing vaccine hesitancy by even questioning the safety of these shots. And I was told that I was not allowed to say anything negative about these shots in the course of my work as a family doctor.
Yes.
And so about a month later, when a vaccine injured person came into our emergency room, who I knew had natural immunity to COVID and so should never even have had a shot because she had natural immunity, I told the nurse that this person who was vaccine injured, who had got far more sick from her COVID shot than she did from COVID, and she didn't get sick from COVID because she had natural immunity. It was a minor thing for her.
Yeah.
Anyway, I was fired after having been an emergency room doctor for 30 years. And at that time, I had not had one single patient complaint. And yet I was fired for telling an emergency room nurse that someone with natural immunity doesn't need a COVID shot.
Wow.
And I mean, any doctor in their right mind would know that someone with natural immunity to a disease doesn't need to be vaccinated against something that they're already immune to.
Mm-hmm.
It's just, it's not rocket science. But I was literally, I cannot work as an emergency room doctor anymore. I instantly had my privileges suspended. And so that, so you were literally not allowed to say anything against these shots. It was absurd because, as I say, doctors' highest priorities should be patient safety. And the fact that you weren't even allowed to question the safety of them made no sense at all.
Well, that's if they fire you as an emergency room doctor, and you're the only emergency room doctor, I think, there. How did the community fare after you got fired?
Yeah, so there were two other doctors that would come in just to give me a break. I didn't do all the work. You can't be on call 24/7, but I would say I probably did 40% of all the shifts.
Yeah.
And then these other two doctors would do the other 60% between them. And so that created a crisis for the community. And they had to bring in doctors and so there was a bit of a crisis where they were scrambling to find other doctors and to send them in to try and keep it going. But then 2 months later, the whole emergency room burned to the ground, the whole town burned to the ground. And so there's no emergency room at all because it all went up in smoke. So it's been tough for the community.
Very, very tough for the community. My goodness. Now we're talking about you're talking about safe and effective, and I think we have to understand that these were experimental vaccines, and some people don't even call them vaccines; they call them gene therapies, actually, because if you look at the definition of a vaccine, it doesn't really fit. But there's no long-term data, but they're saying they're safe and effective, and you get punished if you don't go along with a safe and effective narrative. I'm going to cut screen here. I'm going to share screen once again here. This graph is from your presentation. You did a recent presentation to the National Citizens Inquiry. And I was very intrigued by this graph because what you seem to be describing here is the fact that maybe these vaccines are giving us more problems than we anticipated. Could you talk to this graph a bit about what it is showing us?
Yeah. So what one can see in this graph, so this is a graph from the government of Canada. So I've put in the annotations in it to sort of explain it. But what the yellow part of the graph is people in hospital with COVID. And the pink part at the bottom is people in ICU with COVID. And I've marked in on the graph, and the black wavy line that goes horizontally across it is the approximate average number of people in hospital with COVID. So you can see the point at which the vaccine rollout began. And you can see the number of people in hospital, the average number of people in hospital with COVID before there were any vaccines at all was pretty low. Yeah. And then you can see there was a 1-year period where it took the government of Canada 1 year to double vaccinate over 80% of the population. So you can see even while they were vaccinating people, that the average was going up. But once they literally had more than 80% of the population fully vaccinated, ever since then, we have had more people in hospital with COVID than before there were any vaccinations at all. So this is the clearest indication that these vaccines have seriously damaged people's immune systems. They've made people more likely to get COVID and more likely to land up in hospital with COVID. They've been a disaster. Rather than being our way out of this pandemic, this has literally made COVID an ongoing problem because it has so harmed people.
Now, what I can see here, it looks to me like this is, initially we started out, it was kind of, we're dealing with a seasonal type of problem. We see it comes and it goes, and it looks like a pretty seasonal thing. But now it looks like we basically, there's no more seasonality to it. It's just, we don't really have waves anymore. You know, before there were any vaccines, between the COVID waves, there was almost nobody in hospital with COVID. Now, continuously, the hospitals are very full. And so that just goes up to March. I haven't looked at it recently to see if there's any improvement, but that just shows that these shots weren't just not safe and effective, they made things very much worse. Now, you say that it appears as though the immune systems of people are somehow being degraded. Is there a pathology that could be used to explain this kind of this immunity problem?
Yeah, so actually, I'm not sure of the exact science of how it's damaging the immune system. Some of this is through a process called pathogenic priming. Which was actually seen with research done on laboratory animals, testing out gene-based vaccines on the first SARS virus. They saw exactly the same thing, where instead of making these laboratory animals immune to the SARS virus, it made them more vulnerable to it. In other words, they were more likely to get very sick or die than if they had not been vaccinated. And so, but that's just one of the mechanisms, is pathogenic priming. This is so harmful on so many levels. It's very complex.
I also noted another graph during your presentation to the National Citizens Inquiry that caught my attention. I'll share screen again here. Is this graph, and it basically it shows, this is Africa, where only 6% of the population was vaccinated. And if you remember what we saw in our last graph, and then you look at this graph, it looks like Africa, who basically the people weren't vaccinated at all, has come out of this whole thing much better than Canada. Can you explain this?
Yeah, well, you know, it's an interesting thing. All of the people who were least affected by COVID were the people who didn't have television, because they were the people on whom the propaganda didn't work. You know, the propaganda was through the television. They managed to make a lot of people very afraid of COVID by endlessly showing them pictures of ICUs and people on ventilators and telling them how many COVID cases there were and how many have died, and on and on. And the people who who don't have television, which is most of Africa, they didn't see people dying around them of COVID. They didn't want the shot. They didn't see any need for it because people weren't dying. It wasn't anything worse than anything else. And so it's because the propaganda didn't work on them like it worked on Canadians. And so they never went for the shots. And as a result, they've got herd immunity. And you know, I'm in South Africa at the moment, and I can tell you there's not a mask to be seen anywhere. They're done with COVID. More than about a year and a half ago, their COVID, there's still COVID around, but it's a cold. You know, it's not bad at all. People aren't in hospital. People aren't dying. They've got herd immunity.
It's a non-event. Now, it's very interesting that you say that there's not that many televisions in Africa, and that really speaks to kind of a fear campaign. Is what you're describing, a fear campaign. And I don't know. That's a really scary thing, because if you think that a purposeful fear campaign is put in place to make people do certain things, that's a pretty long stretch away from a free and democratic society. And of course, here at C3RF, the Canadian Citizens for Charter Rights and Freedoms, our big thing is charter rights. And as we saw over the course of the pandemic, they were all just blown out of the water. It was just, the things that happened as a result are just absolutely incredible.
They are, just as our charter rights were trampled, so were medical ethics. Mentioned informed consent and patient bodily autonomy, where you have autonomy over your own body, and no one's supposed to be able to force you to have a medical treatment or a medical test that you don't want.
Yes.
All of these things that we had taken for granted were the sort of foundation of a democratic nation were absolutely trampled. It was very astonishing that things that they worked so hard to uphold before the pandemic just went by the wayside.
Yeah, this requires some deep thought, I think. And I'm hoping that the National Citizens Inquiry, with testimony from folks like you, will suss this out and maybe come to some sort of recommendations and conclusions about just what the heck has happened over the course of the last 3 years.
Yes, I think the National Citizens Inquiry was really important. With the inquiry into the emergency measures put in place, the War Measures Act, to deal with the freedom protest in Ottawa.
Yes.
That whole thing was a farce because it was the government investigating themselves.
Yes.
And of course, anybody that investigates themselves is going to be found innocent. It's guaranteed.
Yes.
So the National Citizens Inquiry was wonderful because it, just like the truckers were a grassroots statement about what was happening to Canada, so was the National Citizens Inquiry. It was a grassroots, citizen-led initiative, and I think it's wonderful what Canadians have managed to do with both of those things, both the Freedom Convoy, which literally lit a torch that went around the world, and hopefully the National Citizens Inquiry will do the same thing. I think every country needs to record the crimes and the injustices and the terrible harm that happened in each country, so that those who perpetrated these things can be held accountable. No,
you can't let these types of things slide, because we just can't afford to see these same abuses happen in the future. Now, we talk about, we've spent all this money. We've had 3 years of lockdown. We've got follow-on inflation because we printed so much money. People can't afford houses. Interest rates are going up. All of this can probably be traced back to the pandemic response and what we did in Canada. But at the end of the day, when you look at our medical system, this caught my attention as well, and I'm going to share a screen again. When you look at our medical system, you would think that after all the money we spent, that everything would be on the up and up. But now look at British Columbia here. The system is so broken that British Columbia is sending 5,000 cancer patients away to the United States because the waiting lists and lines are just way too long in British Columbia. So I throw this up for interest's sake, but what I did want to do was lead into Bill 36, which you mentioned, Doctor. This is Bill 36 from British Columbia. It goes into a whole raft of bureaucratic speak about what the bureaucrats can do in lieu of doctors, and they can find offenses, and they have penalties. This one penalty here, I guess maybe you're looking at this. It says a person who contravenes Section 30, unauthorized use of titles, or 34, false or misleading information, commits an offense. And if you go down a bit further, you'll see that the offense can entail, what's this, a fine not exceeding $25,000 or imprisonment for a term of not more than 6 months. So basically, British Columbia with Bill 36 has criminalized any dissent from its medical professional class.
The first thing one would have to ask them is how they define misinformation.
Yes.
Because, medicine and science are never settled. It is always a work in progress. What we never know what we don't know. And that's why medicine and science are always a process of inquiry and debate, where we have to be able to question what we think is true to find out if it really is true. And we have to be able to explore other alternatives. The trouble is, as with what they've accused me with misinformation, they've said that anybody that disagrees with the public health narrative is spreading misinformation. So they're saying that scientific debate is no longer allowed.
Yes.
You're not allowed to question the narrative, and you're not allowed to have an alternative opinion, which is effectively the death of science. Once you're no longer allowed to question, I mean, that's the only way science advances, is by questioning things and by scientific inquiry.
Well,
so it's very, this is not just a freedom of speech problem, it's an anti-science problem.
Well, this speaks to a bill, this Bill 36, which I can't see how it could even be considered legal, because it breaks so many rules.
The other thing that I find very troubling about it is that it effectively puts in place that the colleges, the various different medical colleges, instead of the college being formed from members of the medical profession voting for who it is, they will literally be appointed by the government.
Okay.
Which means that the colleges will literally become political tools. They won't be representative of each different branch of medicine. They will be political tools to follow a political agenda. So this is the politicization of medicine. This is the militarization of medicine, where the government, where doctors and lawyers and those sort of professions have up until now been self-governing.
Yes.
Where doctors govern doctors. They want to put an end to that, and they want bureaucrats governing doctors and telling them what they're allowed to think or say.
Well, this has severe repercussions. I can see from a public standpoint. How can the public trust these medical professionals? They're medical professionals if they're being run roughshod over by bureaucrats and don't have the freedom to give you the best advice that you have to offer your patients.
Exactly. I mean, this seriously, as we said before, it seriously damages the therapeutic relationship between a doctor and a patient. When a doctor is not allowed to say that a certain treatment is unsafe, the patient is trusting that the doctor will tell them the pros and cons of each treatment. It's usually the doctor's job is supposed to be to do that, to warn, look, the doctor could say, this is the treatment I think would be best for you, but these are the pros and these are the cons. You weigh it up and you decide if that's what you would like, and these are the alternatives. That's what informed consent is supposed to be about. But if you're not allowed to criticize something like a vaccine, then you can't give the patient informed consent. And this is a huge problem for patients because they can't get the information they need to make an intelligent and informed decision.
Well, I think what we're talking about here is where the politicization has already happened. It's happened in British Columbia with Bill 36. I mean, it's in writing now, and I think what we're seeing more and more is people are looking at this like it must be a joke. Like this is so crazy. It's got to be a joke. And as we wind down here, Doctor, I want to show this cut screen here and show this little skit. It's Dana Carvey and David Spade. And when you know that things are unraveling when they start laughing at you. Here, take a look at this skit. Okay. I'll get it going here.
COVID. I know. Dude, you know what I knew? There was trouble when anyone that came to our country didn't have to get a vaccine. And I go, if you're telling me I can't go to work, but everyone coming in doesn't have to get one, I go,
well, once we found out, when Fauci said,
Okay, I'm sorry. If you've had 2 boosters and 2 vaccines, you can get and give COVID to another guy who's had 5 vaccines and 4 boosters. What's the difference between a vaccine and a booster? I don't know. Just more vaccine, but booster sounds better. Anyway, a guy with 25 vaccines would get and give COVID to another guy with 25 vaccines. That's why I'm introducing the daily COVID shot. Every day you get a shot. By the time you get to your car, you got no immunity. But it's a beautiful 39 seconds.
Once they start laughing at you, the game is over, and that's where I see this is going. Doctor,
Yeah.
and I think that offers hope for all of us here, because one thing they can't stand is to be mocked and laughed at, and they are being mocked and laughed at right now. I'll tell you. Now, as we wind down, is there anything our C3RF audience can do to help you?
Wow. Well, I suppose, yeah, I mean, the only thing the only recent development is, I'm trying to raise money for my legal defense for this trial that's coming up. So there's now a gift, send, go spot, where, and I mean, I guess I could send you the link to it.
I'll tell you what, I'll do better than that. I'll let me go to your gift, send, go page. Right there.
Okay.
So people can see it. There's Dr. Charles Hoffe Legal Defense Fund. He needs all the help he can get. These legal expenses are not going to be cheap, but it's give, send, go. And I'll stop share there, but I anticipated that might be a request. So
yeah, well, thank you. Unfortunately, legal defense is never cheap. And of course, the government has endless resources. They have teams of lawyers, and they're using taxpayers' money. So this truly is a David versus Goliath.
Yes.
And in fact, so that's what they use to intimidate most doctors to keep quiet and just toe the line. But obviously I didn't do that. I tried to advocate for the safety of my own patients and for Canadians everywhere. And so now I'm paying the price. So yeah.
It's unfortunate, sir. You shouldn't even be in this situation. The situation is so crazy. But from us at C3RF, we wish you all the best and Godspeed on your travails, and we'll certainly be keeping an eye on what happens.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Russ. It's been great talking to you.
Okay. Bye for now.
Take care. Okay. Bye.